hurricane-force winds. 32 trillion gallons of rainfall. Up to 20 feet of mountain snow. From Christmas 2022 to mid-January 2023, at least 9 back-to-back storms slammed the state of California in barely 3 weeks' time. The so-called atmospheric rivers, or filaments of deep moisture from the tropical Pacific, blasted the West Coast like a fire hose. And the results proved deadly. 45,000 people were evacuated and 20 died as floodwater swept through cities. Rivers swelled, roadways became rapids, and entire neighborhoods were isolated. Dangerous landslides, at least 500 of them, sliced facades off hillsides. They undercut roadways, tossed boulders into the street, and even destroyed a home in Berkeley. At the coast, onshore winds piled water against the shore. In some places, hurricane-force winds whipped up 20 to 30-foot waves. They broke towards the beaches, causing coastal erosion and even damage. On Sunday, January 8th, I flew to Reno, Nevada with MyRadar cinematographer Matt Hyland. Our goal was simple on paper: dissect an atmospheric river from every possible angle. In practice, however, it was a battle against Mother Nature. Atmospheric rivers are usually a couple hundred miles wide, but can stretch thousands of miles long. They carry their heaviest moisture about a mile above the ground. That's why the higher elevations often pick up the jackpot totals of rain and snow. Mountains poke into the atmospheric river, focusing that moisture and nabbing extreme totals. We were bound for the Sierra Nevada, choosing a location at roughly 7,000 feet elevation. As soon as we landed, however, the snow began to move in, and any delay could prove crippling to our journey. We left Reno, where temperatures were hovering in the 40s. After a quick stop at In-N-Out Burger, where I've never seen photographer Matt Hyland so happy, we began the trek west onto Interstate 80. The higher we climbed, the more quickly the temperature fell. By the time we got to Donner Pass, visibilities had dropped to a few hundred feet as snowfall rates topped 2 inches per hour. The pass was named after the ill-fated Donner Party, a group of settlers in the 1800s. They became trapped in the Sierra Nevada during the wintertime and reverted to cannibalism in order to survive. While I wasn't concerned about my photographer eating me, I was worried about making it to our destination. Our progress slowed to a crawl as the road became more difficult to navigate. 40 miles per hour, then 30, then 20, then 10. At 1:27 in the morning, we finally lurched our car into a snowbank to park. Once we were in, there was no getting out. We lugged our suitcases up a hill, struggling to catch our breath thanks to the elevation. There was no staff to be found anywhere in the lodge, or guests for that matter. Like a scene out of The Shining, the silence was deafening. Sleep came quickly and without permission. By morning, 2 feet of snow had accumulated, although that came atop more than a meter that was already on the ground.
Atmospheric rivers carry the bulk of their moisture about a mile above the ground. What that means is that obviously up here, we're protruding into the atmospheric river. So all that moisture is forced up the mountains where it cools, condenses, forms precipitation, and obviously a lot of snow. Now that's integral to the economy out here. A lot of ski lifts make their money, make their living off this, but sometimes it's too much of a good thing. Now, I'm not particularly tall, I'm 5'8", but behind me you can see we're at about 6 feet of snow on the ground. Obviously not all fell last night, but this time of year in the Sierra Nevada, odds are you're gonna see 4 to 6 feet on the ground at pretty much any given time.
A jack-of-all-trades innkeeper and handyman at the Claire Tappan Lodge, says he has to pace himself as the winter wears on.
You just kind of expect it, you know, we get these wet periods, and sometimes we get even like a wet winter, we'll get like a couple weeks of dry weather. And right now, as you know, we're in a wet period, hoping it ends soon. We're getting tired of shoveling.
The weight of the snow was made worse by liquid precipitation that had fallen overnight. Even though we are at 7,000 feet, the atmospheric river trucked in mild air. After all, it's a conveyor belt from the tropics.
During the overnight, our snowfall briefly flipped over to rain, but we got snow once again, and plenty of it. But that's a concern too, because anytime rain does come down, the snowpack absorbs it like a sponge, and that can destabilize that snowpack and set the stage for dangerous or deadly avalanches.
During our interviews, the snow returned with a vengeance. Picture a downpour, but made out of icy confetti. It's not uncommon for snowfall rates in the Sierra Nevada to approach the ridiculous during atmospheric river events, sometimes exceeding 7 inches per hour. Birch, who is from New Jersey originally, first came here with his wife 27 years ago to ski. He says the only way to appreciate the caprice of the atmospheric rivers is with a healthy respect for the elements.
Said, living up here, you get used to the weather and you pay attention to it.
But sometimes, he adds, you need to know when to sit a storm out.
Oh yeah, big storms, I get nervous. I have to go to work the next day. If it's really bad, I won't go in.
Ever the New Englander myself, I set out to dig our vehicle free as soon as the snow began to taper in intensity. The first hurdle was finding it. Miraculously, the road had been plowed down to bare pavement overnight. The snowbanks on either side of the street, however, towered up to 8 feet high.
I found our French fries from yesterday.
Exiting the mountains, we were reminded just how much of a snowpack had built up, and why that reservoir of snow, which gradually melts in the springtime, is an integral component to California's water supply. Colin McCarthy is a freshman at the University of California, Davis, studying atmospheric rivers. He's also a MyRadar contributor. He says that out of every feat accomplished by the barrage of atmospheric rivers, one thing stood out the most.
There's actually the stat that does reservoir storage plus snowpack, and we went from millions of acre feet under normal in a couple weeks to now we're above normal for the time of year. So that's adding the amount of storage we have in the water, and then the snowpack, which is almost 220% of normal. And the latest weather models have another possibly 5-10 feet coming into the Sierra, so we're not close to done yet.
It proved the deepest January snowpack the Sierra Nevada had ever recorded. Then it was time to head deeper into the San Joaquin Valley for the next phase of our storm system. Arriving in Sacramento, the signs of the preceding atmospheric river were visible everywhere. Heavy rains had dragged down jet stream momentum from aloft, leading to winds near the ground close to hurricane force. Sacramento gusted to 72 miles per hour, while San Francisco saw 3 gusts to near 60 miles per hour within the span of just a week. Michelle Mead is the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Sacramento. A 28-year Weather Service veteran who served all around the country, she's seen it all, and yet California's Central Valley stands out.
We were just below a Cat 1 hurricane. We can get gusts of that nature. Usually they are associated with a thunderstorm. What we had happened that evening was we had a low-level jet, and we had just enough mixing in the lower atmosphere that they came down.
Saturated soils meant the ground could no longer hold on to root balls, making it easier for trees to topple. At one point, more than 500,000 Californians were left without power.
I saw an oak tree probably like 10 feet in diameter that fell over on Davis, which is pretty incredible. An old oak tree, and it was just roots completely uprooted.
In 10 years, this is the busiest I've ever been. If it's not heat, it's drought, it's flooding. We're constantly doing something. It might not be the scale of the big tornadoes and stuff that people are used to seeing in the Midwest, but it impacts millions of people here. So we constantly have to have our finger on the pulse of what is changing.
Those changes were palpable as we settled into our hotel on the evening of January 9th. The skies were tinged with delicate peachy hues, a few amber pastels betraying the clamor that would come just hours later.
All right, so we're in the lull right now between different rounds of this pretty intense weather system. The actual atmospheric river itself is pushing east through central California. Already got, as you can see right here, this is what gave us the snow overnight in the Sierra Nevada. Now this is pushing east, the fire hose is shutting off. Then we get this break, but then this twist comes in tonight. This is the pocket of convection or shower and thunderstorm activity underneath the core of the upper level low. There's cold air aloft, moisture and warmth is blossoming upwards, generating these storms. So one of our models does a good job kind of showing what to expect. You see, there's really nothing going on for the first part of the overnight, and we zoom in right over here and you'll see, look, after like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, bam, thunderstorms, kind of rare for California, push in after like the wee hours early tomorrow morning. They overspread the Central Valley, snow in the higher elevations. So again, it's like a 6-hour window of just a punch of heavy precipitation rates, more flooding likely and more big time snow likely. So it's gonna be an early wake up call tomorrow.
I awoke to the piercing tones of my alarm clock. 3 a.m. had come early. Groggily, I rubbed my eyes and grabbed my phone, flipping to the MyRadar app. Immediately, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Thunderstorms had exploded and were heading directly for us in the dead of night. It was January, and yet Sacramento was under a rare, severe thunderstorm warning. We set out in hot pursuit of the storms, which were producing lightning rates reminiscent of something out of Florida or Oklahoma. 20 flashes per minute illuminated the skies like an out-of-control discotheque. Then things got even weirder. A pair of tornado warnings was issued, one for Modesto and the other for Stockton. It was the first time the National Weather Service in Sacramento had ever issued overnight tornado warnings. The northern of the 2 tornado-warned cells would go on to produce an EF1 twister with 90-mile-per-hour winds in the town of Milton.
We're definitely a team, you know, and in fact, 2 of the forecasters that are working today got a phone call at 3 in the morning.
The overnight team was also forced to issue flood advisories and warnings. A quick half-inch of rain came down, contributing to more than 8 inches in just over 2 weeks. Sacramento was set to end January at 3 times what was normal.
The sponge is full. The ground is saturated and the small creeks and streams are no longer small creeks and streams. So we're constantly doing that awareness and safety messaging, especially at night.
In the valley, flooding can be deadly, but in the higher elevations, it can wreak havoc in other ways as well.
There's, potential for flooding and landslides, mudslides, rock slides, and that usually happens with atmospheric rivers in one of 2 ways. You can either get really intense rain rates in a short period of time.
That was the case in January 2018. At least 15 people died in Montecito, California, when heavy overnight downpours fell on the 281,000-acre scar of the Thomas Fire from a month earlier. That sent a stream of ash and debris cascading into neighborhoods, washing people to their deaths in the middle of the night. 5 years to the day, residents were forced to flee again.
There's also potential for impacts just from persistent atmospheric rivers, maybe more than one that's what we've seen early in 2023 is a sequence, one after the other with very little break.
But just how much rain did come down during the 9 back-to-back atmospheric rivers? 15.52 inches in San Francisco, its wettest such stretch on record. 5.46 inches fell on just December 31st alone, marking the second wettest day the city had recorded since the 1840s. In Sacramento, 11.59 inches fell, and Santa Rosa saw more than 16 inches. Farther south, Los Angeles picked up a tamer 7.5 inches, and San Diego fell just shy of 5.5. In the coastal range, however, the totals were more extreme. Some places picking up nearly 4 feet in 3 weeks. The one-day totals were even more staggering.
In Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, 17 inches of rain in 24 hours.
In Ventura County, evacuation orders were issued, representing a fraction of the 45,000 people who were forced to evacuate statewide. Santa Cruz County saw a litany of problems too. En route, we encountered crews cleaning up from a series of mudslides. Even despite a break in the precipitation, the nearby town of Watsonville was still anxiously holding its breath as floodwaters continued to rise.
The end of the rainfall doesn't necessarily signify the end of problems. Over here, this is the Pajaro River. It's about 31 feet right now. Now it crests roughly 24 hours after the end of the rainfall, so it's still rising. Here's the thing though, the town floods at about 32 feet. Watsonville, on the other side of this levee, is dangerously close to the rising waters.
Residents around town were forced to barricade their homes with sandbags, or in some places abandon their workplaces altogether. During our time, we experienced just one of the 9 atmospheric rivers that plague the states. All told, 20 people died. And while atmospheric rivers are a staple of a typical wintertime, seeing 9 back-to-back is far from typical.
Maybe not to the extent that we've seen it at this level, but getting into these patterns of storms happens around once a decade. Last time we were doing something like this was in 2017.
California state climatologist Michael Anderson says that extreme weather will always occur, but he did note that climate change is helping supercharge these atmospheric rivers.
I like to say that, with climate change, the atmosphere has more energy to work with. And that goes both for when it gets hot.
Counterintuitively, that's leading to both more drought and more flooding. The reason? Warmer air can hold more water. For every degree Fahrenheit the air temperature warms, the air can carry 4% more moisture. When that moisture is available, it translates to heavier rains. And when it's not, the hotter atmosphere desiccates the landscape. It's something residents are noticing firsthand.
California is definitely a feast or famine sort of state. We've obviously been on 5 years of drought.
California's feast or famine winters. You can go months without them, but right now we're in the middle of what we like to call atmospheric river families, where you get these successive atmospheric rivers that lead to more impacts.
Since pre-industrial times, California has warmed about 3 degrees statewide. That's having a bearing on extreme weather. Consider Sacramento, for example. Between March 20th and October 17th, 2021, not a single drop of water fell, their longest dry streak on record. That's 212 days without precipitation. But 4 days later, the city picked up a staggering 5.44 inches on October 21st, their wettest day on record. The culprit? An atmospheric river. And in September 2022, Sacramento hit their hottest temperature ever recorded. The city had never logged a reading above 110 degrees during the month of September. On both September 5th and September 6th, temperatures spiked to 114 to 116 degrees.
What I like to tell the people is that more and more frequently, you're going to experience something that you will say, I don't remember it doing that. It's not behaving the way it used to. And that's your signature where climate change is influencing things. You're seeing a storm you thought you understood, but it's behaving in a way that's different than what you remember.
Atmospheric rivers are already inherently complex weather systems. Add climate change to the equation, and the stakes become even higher.
One of the challenges in forecasting these storms in California is that to our west is the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is very data sparse.
Fortunately, researchers have come up with an ingenious solution to harvest data where it's tough to get. The U.S. Air Force Reserve hurricane hunters are being deployed into atmospheric rivers to collect data and take key atmospheric measurements.
We drop a pattern, usually during atmospheric rivers, we drop a pattern of 30 dropsons separated by usually about 100 kilometers or so along a predefined track. And those dropsons take about 14 to 15 minutes to fall to the ocean. They fall by parachute. And during that entire time, they're gathering data every quarter of a second on a GPS-derived wind direction and wind speed. And along with that, every half a second, they're collecting pressure, temperature, and humidity. You're talking about a difference of billions of gallons of water that people who manage reservoirs and sewage systems and things like that have to manage all those billions of gallons of water.
The aircraft are flown higher than virtually any commercial aircraft ever will, and there's a reason for that.
More altitude is more data. The longer it drops, the further it drops, the more data you get. We're getting, pressure, temperature, and humidity, wind speed, wind direction up 1 time per second. So if you get that profile from 45,000 feet and below, that's more data to do more predictions with. I've been based in Honolulu, Hawaii here for these atmospheric rivers. The The Air Force is over in Sacramento, California, getting it from the east to the west, and then we're in Hawaii, getting it from the west to the east.
Nardi is accustomed to flying blind in hurricanes, so to speak, relying on instruments to chart his course forward. Atmospheric rivers are a completely different beast.
Being able to see everything, that certainly, at least psychologically, if not physically, gives you a certain amount of comfort that when you can see a blow up and get around it, and it's day VMC, visual meteorological conditions, that certainly mitigates a lot of risk.
That doesn't mean it's easy, though. Even high above the clouds, the ride is far from smooth.
Typical hazards for this mission profile are the jet stream. So we usually don't deal with the jet stream down in the tropics, but because the jet stream is so powerful up here, I think we got one SON that registered up to 200 miles per hour. This is the turbulence associated with the jet stream is very real.
Despite the many dangers of atmospheric rivers, though, they are a necessary part of California's ecosystem, and especially water resources.
There's also beneficial aspects. Atmospheric rivers contribute a significant amount to the water supply in the western part of North America. In California, it can be as much as 30 to 50% of their annual precipitation on average can come from atmospheric river events in the cool season.
With California's Mediterranean climate, you have dry summers and then wet winters. So when the rain falls in the winter, you want to capture that so you have it for use in the summer, especially in the big cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco.
The challenge becomes how to store the water. Damming reservoirs can lead to more flooding, but letting the water run to the ocean means relinquishing a precious resource.
Well, it depends where it falls. If it falls above the reservoirs, we can catch it. We certainly have been doing that. If it falls in places where it's just hitting the landscape into the rivers and out to the ocean, if you don't have a developed infrastructure to divert and store, there just isn't that ability.
Unfortunately, there's no way to know what may be in store for the rest of the season.
Yes, it's been really active, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a normal or above normal water year. Like, this has just been a couple of weeks of active weather, and when you dig yourself into such a deep hole in terms of drought conditions, it's going to take a lot to get out of that hole.
As we saw last year, though, we had a fantastic December that really put us in a really strong position, and then nothing happened. And by the time we got to October 1, it was one of the lower snowpacks in history. So,
if the summer proves dry, the winter rains could be even more of a problem for wildfire season.
The more precipitation is going to result in more vegetation growth and grass growing in the foothills. And in the summer, you're still probably going to go weeks or months without precipitation. That dries out your vegetation. And if you go long enough, you can increase your fuel capacity, which will result in pretty extreme fire behavior.
Atmospheric rivers aren't all bad news, however. We wanted to end our journey on a high note by visiting some sleeping giants who bask in the baptismal rains of atmospheric rivers, the California redwoods.
It's difficult to appreciate just how massive these trees are. Keep in mind, I'm 5'8", this thing probably about 10 feet plus in diameter, stretching taller than a 10-story building.
An hour north of San Francisco at the Muir Woods National Monument, hundreds of coastal redwoods stand sentry over the somnolent landscape. Of the species Sequoia sempervirens, many of the trees we visited have been standing for close to 1,000 years. The tallest of the bunch is 258 feet tall.
Many of these regal trees built a home exactly where the atmospheric rivers come ashore. They depend on those life-giving waters. They've been here for hundreds of years, weathering many storms, and something tells me they'll weather many more.
Muir Woods receives between 40 and 50 inches of rain per year. The trees thrive off the winter rains, surviving the summers with only the occasional drip of fog to sustain them. Even that, however, may be changing thanks to human-induced climate change.
something was once an extreme. As things continue to warm, that extreme may become episodic, say once every couple years.
In the end, the impact of California's latest atmospheric river barrage may take months or years to fully realize. The loss of human life, the impact of property, and the role it could play in fire season may foreshadow what lurks in the years ahead.
Follow MyRadar on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Download MyRadar on iOS, Android, Amazon Alexa, Xbox, and Windows.